Any minute now. There we go. So, now then, I want to take a bit of a risk this morning, okay? Because I'm living life on the edge. Now, don't let me down, Grace Church. Do not. Do not be sort of clever and think we're not going to do what he says, okay? This is not that time. If I was to sing 3 words, why? Brilliant. Grace Church, I love you. You didn't let me down. I'm thinking, this is going to bomb. I did it to Sarah Jenkinson afterwards, and she deliberately went quiet, and I'm like, oh, it scared me to death. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But she did. Delilah. Now, that song is actually not a very nice song, and it's not about this Delilah, but it probably was sort of like that name probably came from that. You won't call your kid Delilah nowadays, would you? You know, there's certain, you won't call your kid Delilah. You won't call him Lucifer. You know, there's some Jezebel, Beelzebub. There's some names probably have gone a bit out of fashion. And this Delilah, it's a shame, it's a nice name. There are many stories in the Bible with heroes and villains. Incidentally, does anybody know who these two are? I know who they are, by the way. So who are they? Victor Mature. Dave, who's this? Who's the lady? Come on, man. This is your type of thing. Hedley Lamar. That's who it is. So, this film was out in the 40s. So I'm using this film as my sort of reference point. But basically, there are many stories that don't escape Christianity, do they? They stay within our walls. But this story is up there with Noah and the Ark and Adam and Eve and David and Goliath, Joseph and his coat of many colors. This story, Samson and Delilah, a lot of people know about. So, I asked atheist Warren about it. I says, Warren, what do you know about Samson and Delilah? And he said, well, it's funny that funny you should ask me that, Terence. Now, I've worked with atheist Warren for quite a lot of years. I don't work with him at the moment, but over the years we've worked together quite a lot. So we've driven each other's cars quite a bit. I guess the company cars. And so he says, I borrowed your car about 20 years ago, and there was a CD in it about Samson, and you were speaking. Now, I'd forgotten any of this. He says, you were speaking, so I listened to it all. I'm like, 20 years ago, they listened to a CD of me speaking about Samson. I had no idea. So I said, it's okay, Warren. So in order for me to communicate what you think about this to our good people on Sunday morning, because I've let the cat out of the bag, I've told him that I call him atheist Warren and all that. He don't care. I says, what do you know about Samson? He goes, well, now Warren he's about 6'2" and bald and with a beard. He says, well, I think he's probably a bit like me. So I said, what's that? He says, well, he was really, really strong, and then he went bald and got weak. I'm like, yeah, nailed it. Back in the Old Testament, there was a time when Israel was ruled by judges. Now, there's a time, actually, Israel's ruled by judges and it's ruled by kings. But the judges bit, of which Samson was one of them, took about 300 years-ish, and there was maybe 12 or 14 or 15 judges during that time. And you can read about it in a book called Judges. And in fact, after this kings ruled Israel, and you can read about the kings in a book called, they did it very obviously in the Old Testament. It's like, let's do this, call it Judges. So in chapter 13, 14, 15, 16 is the story of Samson. Now, the judges were all pretty flawed, I would say, in various ways. Of the, let's say, 15 of them, there's only really one that stands out as essentially a good person, and that was the only woman judge. Someone called Deborah. So she's the one that's really cited as being a good judge. Most of the others were flawed in various ways, as we all are, of course, but most of them were. This guy, Samson, was no exception. So I'm going to quickly give a paraphrased version of his story to set the scene for some people that may not know or have forgotten. So Samson was what they call a Nazarite. So a Nazarite is something that he was called from birth and would have been, it was something that he was for the rest of his life. I think this might be the next slide. And a Nazarite is marked primarily by three things. They set aside for God, but they are marked by sort of three things. First of all, you can't cut the hair. Secondly, you can't go near dead bodies. Thirdly, they can't drink wine or have grapes or anything like that. They can't go near that type of stuff. Alcohol, grapes, anything like that. And they set aside. They're disciplined. They are meant to look and act different to the rest of us. That's the whole point of being a Nazarite. Now, Samson grew up with extraordinary strength. Now, this guy, Victor Mature, is 6'2", and he was quite a sort of like a healthy-looking man, shall we say. I strongly suspect that Samson was actually either short and skinny or short and fat. This is my theory. If he looked like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, then everybody would know where his strength came from. But he was strong, and people's like, why is this guy strong? So I'm gonna. There's a bit of poetic license in this message, to be honest. But I'm gonna say this guy is short and fat, right? Or short and skinny. Take your pick. I don't care. Point is I do not think he looked like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson or Victor Mature. I think he looked very ordinary. So people did not know where his extraordinary strength came from. And it came along whenever God came upon him, primarily. It doesn't really say when he's strong beyond that. But there was extraordinary things that Samson did when the Spirit of God came upon him. But instead of living with a purpose, he seemed to live by impulse. He meets this Philistine woman, which he had no right to be mixing with anyway. Philistines and Israelites, they didn't really get on. And he said to his mum and dad, "Get her for me." I mean, I'm not sure that that's really the sort of language anybody should use about anybody. But get her for me. Who says stuff like that? And his mum and dad did. At one point, Samson's in a vineyard. He shouldn't ever been anywhere near a vineyard. He's in a vineyard and a lion attacks him. So he kills the lion with his bare hands. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. Later on, he's back in the same vineyard. Again, this is a bit of poetic license. I think Samson was a bit of a drunkard. And I think there's evidence to show that. But anyway, whether he was or was not, he's in a vineyard. And he goes to the lion and scoops some honey out the inside of the lion. The lion's a dead body. Shouldn't be anywhere near it. These are significant points within this very short period of time we can talk about Samson, or we can see about Samson, which tells us the sort of guy he was. And then he passed some honey on to his mum and dad as well, made it even worse. And at his wedding feast, now the wedding feast took place over 7 days. I'm going to go out there on a limb and say there was heavy drinking taking place at that wedding feast. It shouldn't have been anywhere near that type of environment. And it was full of Philistines. Turns out Samson hadn't got any mates. So there was nobody there. They had to sort of hire a best man for him. So Samson's got no mates, just his mum and dad, gets married to a Philistine woman. So while he's there, he turns the wedding into sort of an ego boost for him. And he brings this riddle out. And essentially, his bride is then pressured into telling the Philistines what the answer to the riddle is. That really escalates. Samson ends up killing the 30 men that was involved in the riddle. They end up then issues with his wife. His wife then doesn't sort of marry him, but she is married to him, but not really. Then she ends up getting burned to death. Then he ends up, I think we're moving on to other slides here, by the way. If you could, so here we are, Samson the judge. This is him in a nutshell. So he kills all these Philistines. Then he sets fire to all their crops, which would have been tantamount to killing some more, because when you've got no crops, you've got no food. Then he kills 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, which is another dead animal. The power that Samson had when the Lord came upon him was undeniable. But the life Samson was leading was inconsistent, compromised, and self-driven. Then along comes Delilah. Why? Hey, I won't do it again. And along comes Delilah. She's really his weak spot. So everybody heard of something called an Achilles heel? Yeah, exactly. So I think it's a Greek myth, but it might be some other old race. It might not be Greek. It could be something else. Pardon? It is Greek. Right, okay. So basically, his mum holds him in a pot of keep yourself from getting killed juice by his heel, and it meant that in future, only way he could get killed was if somebody shot his heel. And that is why it's called an Achilles heel, because he was called Achilles, and that was the only way he could kill him. So Samson had many, many Achilles heels, but one of them was definitely Delilah. So they get together. Now, they're not married. They get together, and she clearly is working on behalf of the Philistines. She's a Philistine, and she's asking him again and again, why are you so strong? Obviously, this is why I'm saying he didn't look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. She wants to know, what is the source of your strength? And what does Samson do? He plays with the danger. That's what he does. He comes out with all sorts of sort of little stories about, like, well, this is why I'm strong. It's because of this. If you tie me up with new ropes, then I'll become like any other man. That's one of them. So she gets him drunk, he falls asleep, and then she calls the Philistines in. They come upon him, and he kills them all, because, of course, that's not what it is. He plays with the danger, but ultimately he tells her the truth. And he says, actually, if you cut my hair off, I will get weak. So she does. I don't understand why he would do that, whether or not it was on some sort of self-destruct mission that made him think, I've just got to find out if this woman loves me or not. Or whether or not he actually felt, you know what, I'm above God. I don't need my hair to be strong. I'm actually my own man now. I don't know. It's a weird thing to do, because this guy would have been identified by his long hair. Why would he want to not have it anymore? But he told her. So he wakes up and his strength is gone. She's absolutely deceived him. And he's captured by the Philistines. They poke his eyes out, he's blinded, and he's imprisoned. Horrendous. And all of a sudden, his life changes like that. And he goes from being a strong man to being a weak man, and a weak man in a dire situation, a blind, weak man. At the end of his life, his hair's grown back. The Philistines bring him out to parade him in their temple. And they don't really realize, they don't clock that his hair's grown back. And he prays to God, Lord, just one last time, give me my strength so I can have revenge on my two eyes. Now, that's an interesting statement. He knows where his strengths come from, but his motivation is revenge for his two eyes. He's not saying, Lord, give me back my strength so I can really sort out these Philistines for you one last time. He's saying, so I can have revenge for the fact that these lads have poked my eyes out. Samson, in my opinion, was a dodgy bloke. He was a dodgy bloke. Samson's story is really messy. It's marked by lust, anger, pride, compromise. A man set apart who constantly chose not to live set apart. I'm not sure if you're not showing me on the next slide. I'm not sure what they are, to be honest with you. Just have a look. A person that over and over again, we can leave it on that one, over and over again, disregarded their calling to the point of danger, to the point where they took you right to the very edge. So the question I want to ask me and you is, what is your Delilah? Samson's story isn't really about strength, it's about weakness. It's about a man anointed by God who never fully dealt with his weakness. A man with multiple Achilles heels, as we all have. A man whose weakness had a name, and it was Delilah. But what's our Delilah? Anger, lust, power, compromise, addiction, isolation, pride, comfort, control, rejection. and loads of others. These are the Delilahs that we face in our lives every single day. See, Samson's weakness showed up actually before Delilah came on the scene. In his appetites, in his anger, in his independence, in his lust, in his casual approach to the Spirit of God. This is how his Delilah showed up before Delilah came on the scene, and this is what we're dealing with every day. Thank God, God used him despite his Delilahs. And God can use you, and God can use me even while he's still working on us. See, we don't have to grow to be the best version of ourselves before God can use us. Samson never became the best version of himself, ever. He was always a dodgy bloke. I had my haircut the other day, and the next thing next to me under barbers, there was a dodgy bloke. Everything about this guy, being a bit judgmental here, I know, but it was nobody in this room, James. No, it wasn't. You knew he was a dodgy bloke just by hearing his conversation, and this was Samson. He was a dodgy bloke. Samson's life wasn't polished, wasn't consistent, and he was a long way from the finished article. Even at the end, he's flawed, damaged, and broken, and yet God still moves through him. Now, throughout the Bible, we hear about the Spirit of the Lord coming on people. It's with Jesus all the time. Who do we hear about the Spirit of the Lord coming on the most in the whole Bible? Samson. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. More than David, more than Saul, more than Moses. Samson. And yet, Samson is a promiscuous, self-seeking, impulsive, angry thug. That's a bit of an extreme statement. But I'm making a point here. He wasn't a good man. But God chose him to work through. And that should encourage us a great deal, because nobody in this room is as bad as Samson. I don't think so anyway. God works with us in our Samsonness. He works with us while we are growing. We don't have to reach some sort of imaginary standard that is in our head before we can allow God to use us. God can use us today, right now, whoever we are. Purpose and growth happen at the same time. And God is not waiting for a finished version of us before he begins. I do not have to be a good man or a good woman for God to use me where I am. I can be who I am, and God can still use me. Now, don't get me wrong, God wants us to get better. He doesn't want us to be bad people so he can use us. I'm not saying that. Please don't misunderstand me. So the next bit is about small compromises, having big outcomes. See, Samson didn't fall in one moment. He drifted, line by line, inch by inch. Decision by decision, compromise by compromise. That's what he did. There's a powerful line in a book called The Song of Solomon. And paraphrase, it says, it's the little things that spoil the big things. And it really is. It really is the little things that ruin the big things. The attitudes we tolerate, the habits we excuse, the patterns we don't confront. They work quietly in the background of our lives, and they undermine who we should be. But here's the encouragement, because the opposite is also true. It's the small, faithful decisions we make every day that make the difference. It's the small things we do that also build us up. They build strength, they build integrity, and they shape who we are becoming. That's every prayer we make. Every time we come to church, every decision to walk towards God rather than away from him. Every little time we do that builds in the opposite direction. All the time, all the time, all the time. And that's the beauty of it. It's not all negative. It's not all about compromise, because there's two sides to that same coin. So let's make sure we are making small, incremental changes wherever we can. And let's not say, well, I was bad this morning, so I may as well be bad all day. Let's not do that. Point 3. We are weaker when we are alone. I know I've mentioned it a few times in the last few words, and maybe God's talking to me about something. But isolation is not good for anybody. Samson consistently resisted guidance, ignored wise voices. He had no mates. He isolated himself in his decisions, especially regarding his relationships. He lived as if his strength made him independent of the rules, but it doesn't. Strength without accountability is fragile, and it's imbalanced. And we can see that in the world today, where one person all of a sudden has power and strength beyond their emotional intellect, for want of a better expression. When you are isolated, then your Achilles heel is even more dangerous. No one to challenge you. No one to ask the difficult decisions. And this is not about having a significant other in your life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about connecting with the source and continually getting alongside other Christians who will feed the right part of your life, who will speak truth into you rather than tell you what you want to hear, who will be brave enough to say, I don't think that's a great idea. It's those people that keep us in line. We are not designed to do life in isolation. The right people in your life are not a restriction, they are your protection. So, what is my Delilah? What is your Delilah? Because we all have one. It's not necessarily a person, but a pressure point, a vulnerability, an area where we're more likely to drift into if we're not careful. It could be pride, or it could be approval, comfort, control, anger. We've been through them all. The question is not if you have an Achilles heel, it's are you able to identify what it is? Because if you ignore it, then we give it power. If I don't recognize that it's there, then it tricks me better. It tricks me easier. It's got a different type of grip on me if I don't believe it exists. I would like us all to take that away from here this morning, particularly prayerfully consider, what is my Delilah? Where am I weakest? And what do I need to guard against? And how can I make that difference in my own life? Because Samson's tragedy wasn't that he had a weakness. It was that he never took it seriously. He kept going back. He played close to the edge all the time. He kept assuming his strength would carry him through, till one day it didn't. And of course, that is where grace steps in. Because if we're honest, there is that Samson in all of us, surely. I know there is in me. Moments where I should have known better, but I drifted and compromised, ignored the warning signs. But thankfully, thank God, that isn't the message of the gospel, is it? Because the same God who worked through Samson meets us in our weakness. Paul talks about this in Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says this, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Now, Paul had a weakness. Don't know what it is, but he had a weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. God meets us at our weakness, and he meets us at our Delilah, and he met Paul at his weakness. It shows us grace. Grace for inconsistencies in my life. Grace for me being impulsive. Grace for me getting it wrong. Grace for the Samson in me that's trying to get out all the time. And the beauty of this story, Samson didn't go out in a blaze of glory. He pushed some pillars down and killed all the Philistines. But the whole story is not really positive about Samson. But God wasn't finished with Samson in Judges 16. That's not the end of Samson's story. Judges 16 is not the last time we hear about Samson. He makes it into the New Deal. He makes it into the New Testament. He doesn't stay in the Old Testament, in the old deal, where it was all about rules and regulations, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He makes it into the grace of the New Testament. Alongside people like Abel, Abraham, Noah, Jacob, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, David, Samuel, Rahab is Samson. Why does he make it into that list, do you think? Now, in that list, there's a lot of flawed people. Murderers, adulterers, liars, cowards, cheats. But all of them came good. I think most of those, all of them, take Gideon, a coward maybe you could call him, but he came good. Abraham, a liar and a coward as well, but he came good. David, he had it all going on with him, but he came good. A man after God's own heart is how he's described. Samson, in my opinion, never really came good. This is how I'm preaching anyway this morning. I think Samson is in this chapter to illustrate God's grace to the new Christians that were there. Because these guys that read Hebrews would have known all this stuff, and far better than us. They'll have known only the Old Testament. They didn't know the New Testament. So they'd have looked at this list and thought, how's Samson in here? He was in there because God was trying to show them, this is what I can do because I am gracious and my grace is sufficient for people like Samson. The God of the Old Testament is a God of judgment. But after Jesus came, we're introduced to a God of grace. And that is why I believe that Hebrews has him in there. And that's why he's chosen to be viewed as a hero. A man of faith. In Hebrews 11, he's in it forever as a man of faith, a hero of the faith. And if God can include someone like Samson in a life like that, he can include all of us as well. Thank God. Such is the power of grace rather than the power of judgment. God wasn't the best man in the Bible by a long chalk. He wasn't godly. He wasn't the nicest. God uses, fortunately, people that aren't godly. He uses people that aren't clever. And God, for me, he uses people that aren't gifted. He uses people that aren't loved. He uses Samson and he uses me and he can use all you lot. I'd like to ask us, if the band want to come up now, I'd like to ask us to consider 3 or 4 things this week. I'd like us to prayerfully consider what is our Delilahs. You may know the answer to that, straight away. But I'd like you to give it some thought. Mull it over this week. Pray about it. Where am I weak? Where do I need to be really in tune? What do I need to be watching for? Secondly, I want to reassure you, don't wait until you're grown to be used by God. Be used by God right now. No matter where you are in your life, allow God to use you because he loves you and he believes in you more than you believe in yourself. Thirdly, small actions have big outcomes. Make positive incremental change now. Pray for a minute a day. Pray for 10 minutes a day if you're already praying for a minute. Pray for 11 minutes if you're already praying for 10 minutes. Make small incremental change right now. And remember, we are weaker alone. Keep fellowshipping. Keep connecting with other Christians. Keep coming here or any other church. If you don't like it here, go somewhere else, but go to a church. Belong to other Christians and let them belong to you. God chose to use Samson, a promiscuous, serial sinning, angry drunkard, but God used him. It was a foolish thing to confound the wise. And we are not as bad as Samson. We're not. We are never, though, too far from God's grace or from God for him to include us in the list of heroes. Because we are all heroes. And God, if God can do that with Samson in a list like that, he can do it with us. God wants you in his list of heroes. He really does. And it's up to us to open that up and say, yes, Lord, I'm going to find out what my Delilah is. I'm going to make positive changes. I'm going to make sure I'm around other Christians. I am not going to be weak alone. Thanks very much.